meeting. This is the Community Council Working Group. Let's start names around the table. Julia?
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Dan Burge, Assembly Community Council.
So,
John
as far as
Sissel,
your- where do you
Community
think?
Development Department.
Kathy Bluestone, Birmingham Community Council.
Michael Pankin with Foothills, and I'm here on behalf of Lauren Bretz for Northeast.
Dick Tremaine, Federation Community Council.
Maria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Maria Rents to get Community Council.
Al Tamani, I'm Loop Council.
Lance Bowell, Van Hillside Community Council.
Earl Akers.
Carol Hess, Municipal Ombudsman.
Tim Scales.
Amy DeBoski, Assembly.
Big Drain Assembly. Thanks for coming out today. Let's see, the most famous person here would probably be President of Sand Lake Community Council, who was anonymous until a couple days later this week. Yeah, now he's infamous.
And staying under radar.
Welcome back from the summer.
I've only got 9,573 miles on my bike.
Hi Dick, how are you doing?
Doing well, Dick.
Daryl, you want to go through the paperwork you gave us?
Yes, I apologize, I was actually going to put together packets, but I was late getting back from our previous meeting and had to deal with a couple of issues. First off, we have the revised draft ordinance there were some tweaks made based on comments at the last meeting. And the changes are underlined and in bold. Then second is the proposed Exhibit A, which will go along with the ordinance, it'll be reformatted, and it is the default bylaws that if the community council does not meet the deadline, proposed 120-day deadline, with a proposed 90-day extension, so 210 days to submit their amended bylaws to the assembly, these bylaws would go into effect.
Say, Daryl, let's make that a little clearer. We were asked last time that when what I was presented with from the community councils was that, okay, if we have the 120-day and an extension that we'd like for 90 days, what happens though when the assembly passes this ordinance and the bylaws that we have now become out of compliance? And so we have two things. We have a mechanism now that says that these default bylaws go into effect to keep you compliant when this ordinance is approved. And so those default bylaws are ones that will accept from and draw in from your current bylaws those things that aren't going to be changed by this. And it will take an action of the of the community council to get that paperwork in to change anything else that's in the default. So we had to pick some provisions so that you're not out of compliance. Otherwise, whenever the effective date of the ordinance went into effect, then we risked, and there apparently some community councils have bylaws that aren't in compliance with current code either. So that's how that exhibit will work. And then we'll have, in addition to that sort of a bare bones one, there will be as we talked about, just a pro forma copy of full bylaws that you can mix and match and do different things with, that'll have other options in. But we had to put in an exhibit with some compliant ones, and in talking to the municipal attorney's office, that was the suggestion that they came up with, and I think that's good.
Thank you. Let the minutes reflect that Mr. Holman joined us. Daryl, go ahead.
And then there were two written comments submitted since our last meeting. One is addressed Daryl et al., and the other one is Ombudsman, Municipality of Anchorage. And then there are two supporting documents referencing Title 21, which are referenced in the one-page comments.
Anything else, Darrell?
That's it.
Hey, Karen, who is this September 24th letter from? Am I missing who this is from?
Cut off the names of both of them, and I'd ask if it was okay to share his name. He didn't respond, but since it was submitted as a public comment, the gentleman's name was Merle Akers.
Oh, okay.
And the second one was from John Weddleton.
The one that says Darrell E.T.?
Yes, that is from John Weddleton. The first one is from Mr. Merle Akers.
Their comments been considered and answered, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, sir.
Have their comments been reviewed and incorporated, or are they just up for discussion?
John, well, I think they're up for discussion today. Mr. Weddleton's was received about 3 hours ago. Mr. Akers, I think the committee needs to discuss his. He references putting into code term limits, the process for replacing officers, things that for 36 years have been left up to the community council. So it would be a fundamental change in the relationship between the municipality and community councils.
Community council, private organizations. Yes.
I was just gonna say to that, and one of the comments that I have heard from the GFP, mostly Birchwood, but, our councils are of the mind, they would like as much individuality as possible. So I would not suggest that we should, dive into the realm of telling how councils, the terms of their officers or how to replace them, or when they have to, because, our councils would like more autonomy than that.
No?
I think
By
also.
the way, congratulations, you got reelected last night, I think.
Well, I was pretty lucky, so that was good. When
There was a
everybody else-
vast amount of people running for the office of president of that community council, but he prevailed.
Thank you. I have one question. I have to agree with Hebby, is that the councils in Eagle River don't come under the Anchorage Comprehensive Plan. They got their own.
They got their own section, I think.
Right. And so I think that, whatever we do, if we do want to tie anything into that, we have to make sure that it's spelled out that they have their own section, which is different than what we have in Anchorage. So, I did have one, if I may, Mr. Chair, on 240030A,
What page you on?
on page number 2 of 14 at the bottom, where it says, business owner shall mean the record owner or agent with an Alaska business license. One of the companies I own is an insurance brokerage, firm.
So you don't have a local Alaska because
And
you're.
so we don't need a business license because we're licensed under the insurance laws, and it exempts us from having to buy to buy a business license.
Okay,
'Cause he
we,
makes a valid point.
a similar thing we looked at for the not-for-profit,
Churches and religious organizations.
yeah, so in that case, if you see on page 3, and I don't know if there's something like this that would help you, but we said that, we put the big thing about having the physical premises located within
Sure.
the council boundaries, and then one or more of the following. And it's like status recognized under law, in that case, is not
Okay.
by incorporation, or current business license, or tax exempt status, or other bona fide affiliation. So what in the for-profit realm do you think would be like that? You don't have to have an Alaska business license. Is that what you're saying? Do you have to have some other kind of license from the state?
Yes, I have a professional insurance license. Ought to be an insurance agent broker.
Right, so I think that we can come up with something similar to what.
You know, you
what-
might want to say Alaska business licensed or licensed professional.
Yeah,
Thank you, Al. Think we can do that, Joanne?
yeah, and I think we'll make it, as I said, parallel, we'll put the physical premises located and one or more, and then we'll sort of have a string of
Sure.
things that show that you're a business, because not all businesses are gonna be incorporated, not all of them are gonna be, have the Alaska business license, but they'll have something, and I'll just,
Al, does that meet your needs?
Oh, yes, yeah, I think it covers, a lot of people.
Thank you for picking that one up on this, Kathy.
You know, I went through this pretty carefully earlier after I got this from Daryl, and so I've got a fair amount of comments, and maybe if we just start from the beginning, page 1, and, whoever has input on each page, would that be helpful?
Does anybody else have things they want to bring up, or we're gonna go with yours, Kathy?
well,
Like
Dick
that.
does, so I think it's good to go page by page and
Page by-
everybody chirp in on that.
Yeah, so we don't
Daryl?
It makes
jump
it
around.
easier for me.
Jerry, you want to lead this off, go page by page on this?
We have a federation bylaw.
Well, I think we haven't made changes on every page, so I think it would behoove us to have Kathy go through with the comments on page by page if you have comments.
I think of all the people we have here, Kathy, you probably have the most changes.
Well, and I'll try and.
I mean, I can
not-
start I can start this if you want. Let's look on page 1. Any changes on page 1? Okay, would you agree on that? How about page 2? Kathy?
Okay, well, and I know this has been in here for a while, so I apologize not catching it earlier. The first paragraph and the second paragraph, there's a lot of repeated language, and so I didn't quite know if that could actually be edited so that you don't repeat that whole negotiation between local government and,
Well, I'll tell you why
it just seems redundant.
we put it in there, is that it, we thought it might be helpful. Right now, all it has is community councils and procedures, and then it just lists the charter reference. And so we thought that since the charter reference was important enough to list as a cross-reference, that we would just spell it out. And so that top paragraph is exactly what the charter says. And so we just wanted to have that up front, so that people don't have to look in two different places to figure out what the deal is. And then the second, and so I'm not inclined to change a word of the first paragraph because it's word for
No,
word
that's
out of the
charter.
charter.
Yeah,
And
that's
so I
fine.
agree that there may be any number of redundancies in there, but I didn't consider it my place or the Assembly's place to change the charter. Then we added the second paragraph because the first paragraph by itself is again what's in the charter, and the second paragraph is showing that that's what this
This is all-
chapter is implementing that, and so
Maybe
that's
just
the
say it
background.
implements the above charter language or something. I don't know, it's not a big deal, it just seemed awkward to have to read it twice, that's all I'm saying.
Anybody else have a problem with it? Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, also.
Moving on down.
Yes, also on page 2, we'll jump to one of John Whittleton's comments, and I concur with that.
No,
As-
which comment?
As
What
far,
line are you at on that page?
yeah, it would be inserted around line 33, after 32, that I believe he would like to see or maybe that's my comment. Actually, that might be my comment. It may not be John's, I apologize. Under membership composition, which is on page 3, the council membership composition, I feel like that should kind of be up front before we dive into the definitions. So, because on page 3, line 11 through 16, it defines what community councils are. And it refers to property owners and businesses and, residents and all that. And then that kind of is the segue to provide definitions. Just to abruptly start defining what a business owner is without giving the context of, and this is one of the criteria of membership, just doesn't seem to flow right.
Julia?
I guess I'm trying to figure out, so we're not on, we're
No,
not
I
on this
apologize.
page,
I was
okay.
thinking that was what
And
John
we're on
recommended.
page 3? And-
Well, what I'm recommending is taking the council definition from page 3, and I know these were put in alphabetical order, and to put it before we just start listing definitions, because we jump from
Well,
purpose of
which one?
chapter.
We have, we got.
Line 11 through 16 on page 3.
Where it says community council members and community council membership shall mean, is that what you're
Yes.
talking about?
Yeah, and so, you know, it lists resident and business owner and nonprofit, and that would give the context of why then all of a sudden we're defining what a business owner is.
Okay, and so do you think that that should stay within definitions, or are you suggesting that that would come under purpose of chapter?
Well, you know, I'd let somebody smarter than me give it a title. I think it should start out with that and maybe not be characterized as a definition, but rather, this is what a community council is. Here's the definition of what we just told you a community council is. You know, here's how we define a business owner, here's how we define a resident. Whether it starts with that one as a definition, or it gets put in before you start defining the definition, I don't care.
Amy?
I was just gonna say, I think it makes sense to me to have that paragraph under definitions, because we're defining it. But at the same time, I see what you're saying, it's setting you up for everything else. This is a
Yeah.
community council, now this is what makes up a community council, so I can see that logic, but I personally think it should stay under definitions.
That's fine, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't.
Okay,
got it
well, I think of what
alphabetical.
she said, they're alphabetical, but let me play with it a little bit, because I'm thinking that what I'm seeing is that sometimes you have an introductory paragraph. And if you only have one, it doesn't have to be an A. And so it's an introductory paragraph, and it says blah, blah, blah about community councils. And then it says, here are the implementing definitions. And then we stick
Yeah.
with the alphabetical. And so I'm thinking that that's what she's talking about. And then we still may have to have some part of this repeated down here, but I'll play around with that, because I have at least a half vision.
Yeah, okay.
Of what you're
good.
talking
Yeah,
about.
if you guys understand kind of what, it just seemed, again, all of a sudden I'm reading what a business owner is with no context of why we're defining a business owner.
Okay, Al and then Paul?
Yeah, I think that, and taking a look on page number 4, line number 16, there's also a definition of who can be included also. Is that repetitive of,
No, see, what happens is that, when you're gonna use terms, then you have to have some section that defines them. And so,
Okay.
where 16 says includes residents, property owners, business owners, and nonprofit organizations, what Daryl and I struggled with when we were first looking at this, is that there didn't seem to be a comprehensive, understanding about what those things mean.
Okay.
So we have to have some definitions before we get to here, and I'm reading, I mean, we started out with these words and terms shall have meaning for purposes of this chapter as follows. That was our lead-in for, the definition section. And what I'm hearing, Ms. Gleason say is that we might wanna stuff that up a little bit, to make a better transition, just ease of wording.
Anything else, Paul? And Al, anything else? I'm
That's
gonna go to
it.
Paul, and I'm gonna get over to you.
I don't so much have.
Let me get to Paul, and I'll get to you. Paul?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I concur, make it short and sweet. I do see what Mr. Tamani is saying too. We could clearly say, you know, member recognition of council as defined in section A, and I think it goes back, as you say, Julie, refers back, I think that would likely eliminate, I mean, I think, as you look at bylaws, people can get lost in the minutia, but on the other hand, if you just make it clear and kind of refer back, I think it makes it more reasonable.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, sir.
I don't so much as have a question as a comment, other than you've made my life simpler, as I'm with Mid-Hillside Community Council, and there was talk about membership list, and I've tried, and Mark knows, I tried to find out members, but you've made this very simple about if you appear at a meeting and you sign the roster, then you're a member.
You're a member.
That's fine. I think, if anything, we should fall off on the side of the log and let people participate.
We were thinking about secret handshakes, but we weren't sure.
Yeah, that's an approach.
Yes, sir.
Secret handshakes, I was ready for that.
You can look at that, Julia.
What is it that you want me to look at?
You can look at what Kathy was talking about on this.
Yeah. she's-
Are we on the same one?
Yeah.
Well,
She agrees.
You're on the same
no,
page.
you brought up something else, but
We're
I
fine.
have comments on that one too.
Okay, Kathy, the next
Okay, are
one.
we letting go of page two now? Are we letting go of the bottom of page two?
Yeah, I don't have
Moving
anything
on
else
to
on
the
page
next
two.
thing.
Okay. Anybody else have anything on page 2? Now we're going to page 3. Kathy, I'm
Now-
sure you're
Well,
on page 3.
Well, it's on page 3, we've just decided to move it to page 2, but I'll talk about what we, the line 11 through 16 now, the actually content of this. Yeah, I know this has been in there before too, and I didn't catch it. I didn't, finally have done my homework properly. By defining membership only excluding everybody else but those who attend and sign in, I mean, that is completely contrary to Turnigan's definition of our membership. Our membership is anyone who lives, right now it's works, owns property, there's several, lives, works, own property, or, as a business, is a member of our council. And then, of course, those who show up, vote on things. But we don't, our membership would change with every meeting based on who comes. Something's wrong with that.
We had that discussion, and the code has said for 36, 37 years that you are eligible to be a member of your community council if you meet these requirements. Some people may not want to be a member of their community council. So to say that everybody is a member of the council, so you have potentially 7,000 or 8,000 members of the council, and then you set the quorum, and you set your quorum at 10 members.
Well, we said quorum, it's based on the amount of people, it's based on who attend, who's there.
Well, some councils, though, the quorum requirements are 5 members, 10 members, 15 members present. And once you sign the register, what this says is, once you sign a register at a meeting, and maybe we need to clarify that, you're a member. And if you come back next year, you're a member.
But, wait, you mean not at every meeting, or?
No. Once you come in and sign a membership roster, the intent was you sign a membership roster at a meeting of the council, you're a member of the council.
For how long?
Forever.
Till you move.
I can see how that wouldn't fly.
That doesn't make sense.
I mean, you could have somebody trying to influence a vote and bring in 100 of their employees, and suddenly you've got 100 people that are members and voting against maybe the 10 people that normally attend a meeting.
Well,
I was just saying, that's not actually necessarily true, because I know in Shugiak, you have, if there's a business that is gonna become a member, only one person from that business gets to become a member. It's not, we do not have the rule of, you have to work in that area.
But if this says that
Yeah.
all they have to do is sign a roster and they become a member,
Yeah,
doesn't
but they
matter.
have to
But
live
there's
in the
also
district.
a
Putting an
restriction.
individual name,
Or-
if they meet
There's-
the other
if they
requirements,
meet the
if
other
they meet the
requirements.
requirements of the
Yeah.
code.
Yeah.
that's the question then. Okay.
So, and the other problem I see with just saying everybody who lives in this area is a member is some councils might have 10% of the membership has to be present, have a quorum, or whatever it is. And if you just say people in this geographic location or that work in this area,
Well, right now, that's not a problem with our bylaws, because we don't define a quorum that way. So, I don't know, that just seems very, very confined in terms of the definition of our
They
membership.
should be eligible for membership, it seems to me, within that geographic boundary, if they are a business or property.
Al's got a comment. Al?
Yeah, I think a lot of those concerns are covered on page 3, line 1 through 4. That defines the membership of a business.
That's why it's in there.
But that's not my concern. My concern, it just seems very
Well, I think he raised
exclusive.
The question as well.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I was just throwing it
Yeah.
theoretical because
Sure.
I was in hearing what you guys were saying, and reading just this by itself, it makes it sound very specific to just signing a list and suddenly you're a member and you can vote. And then it says you can be a member of multiple community councils or more than one community council. Well, what's defining that then?
Yeah,
requirements
and
of
if
the
you're
code
not
defines-
defining the term of your membership, I mean, I guess I think that would be very difficult to track. Because then, again, if we go back to a community council and their bylaws has a quorum that's based on total membership, well, you may have, for example, a West High Stadium being proposed and have 60 people at your meeting and sign in, but then the next month, you know, we have our usual 10 or something, but our quorum is a percentage of membership, and now they've skewed that whole thing. We probably would never have a quorum because they may never come again, but they signed in and now they're a member. I think it just really, well, it's just quite a surprise. It would be a huge change from Turnigan perspective because we consider everybody a member. And then, of course, if they come to the meeting and they actively participate and vote, then that's a, I don't know. I don't know how to resolve this, but I think this is a drastic change for us.
I don't think it is a drastic change because the code right now does not say if you meet the eligibility requirements to be a member of your council. It doesn't say you are a member. It says
But our
you are
bylaws-
eligible.
our bylaws
Right,
say it.
Right, but the code says something different. So currently, you want to co-opt people and tell them they're members of an organization that they have not showed up and signed a roster or filled out an application. You're saying you're a member of the council. So
Yeah, that's what I
You're
said.
telling people they're a member of the council, whereas I think the intent when this was written originally nearly 40 years ago when councils were put into the charter is people are eligible, but they actually have to do something. They have to show up and they have to sign in or attend a meeting or do something to become a member.
Al?
You know, I think it all sounds great, but you gotta take a look at the execution. How are councils gonna track that stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, unless you have a database or an email list that clarifies who lives where, zip code, et cetera, how are you gonna track this going back a year? Well, they showed up in XYZ year 2012 and, or something like that. So the logistics of tracking when they showed up is virtually insurmountable to most councils, unless you have an electronic tracking system that you can code that keeps track of the people that are eligible to be in your council.
Paul?
Just speaking from one example, and I know you're talking Turnigan, Kathy, but we have a fairly active council. It's fairly large in Northeast, and they have a large number of board members, not necessarily the executive level, but the board members. And they are tasked with, particularly in the area of votes like elections and things like that. And they do. They have to document who's a resident, so they have to verify by something, a tax record or their ID that has the address on it. And then secondly, they have to keep a track of who signed in. And I believe they have to have been to at least the previous 2 to 3 meetings prior to the election. And it may be a set period, I'm not clear on theirs, but my point is that you're absolutely right. I go to, as an assembly member, I go to 5 or 6 different council meetings. Doesn't mean I'm a member of all of them. I'm representing them as their representative elected. I only belong to the one I reside in. If I had a business in another, then I suppose I would qualify under the definitions, but I really only belong to one, and then I represent the ones in the others, and I'm not a member that I can vote in say, Northeast or University area or whatever. So you're right. I think it's incumbent on the each community council to keep a list of those who are in attendance. And I don't know how you do it loosely, whether it's electronic or a written piece of paper that somebody keeps in their banker box or whatever, but somebody has to track who's there, and I think just a matter of having it defined makes it simpler.
Well, actually, we do that.
Sir?
Comment, if it were me, and it will be, I mean, I would leave it incumbent on the person to prove that they are a resident. I'm not gonna, I may be off base here, but I'm not gonna get into a big, long tracking list. I mean, if the person says they wanna vote and they're a member, then I would say, well, prove it. There'll be a mailing, something, a piece of mail or something. And so I think and this goes back to what you said earlier about individuality of community councils, and I think, and I haven't noticed any different here, I'm seeing that we need to be as flexible as possible with all these community councils, because obviously we're seeing how they're all can be different in different ways. So that's basically my comment there.
Mark?
Very few community councils I have found that I have visited or talked to the officers or members have an actual list of their members. There's just a couple, really. I know Fairview was doing that for a while, Bear Valley has, and there's a couple more I can't recall. But most, like my North Star that Tim and I are in, they just say if you show up to the meeting and you've been at, like mine, ours says one meeting before and able to vote on an issue. But then, yeah, you just show up, you show your driver's license, you show a tax thing, you go online there at the library and check it out. And so people kind of have to prove up. The overwhelming majority of time at North Star, there is no question of are you a registered member? Prove it. There's usually not that. But every once in a while there is what the council world they call a stuffing, where there's an issue and a whole bunch of people show up to be on one side of that issue. And the usuals who show up are overwhelmed. And that's democracy in my take. If a lot of people show up and they qualify, great. If they're only interested in one issue,
That's Darryl.
that's the reason.
Well, I'm sorry, Tim.
Go ahead.
Darryl, then Tim.
Well, I'm confused in a way, because when I read through 34, 35 sets of bylaws, most councils do only require that you show up and you sign in. If you meet the qualifications, you're a member and you vote. So I'm not, and I couldn't find, a few councils said that the memberships run January 1st through December 31st, but most of them didn't say that they ever expired. So I don't think in the bylaws requirements in the ordinance it says you have to have a membership roster or meeting attendance records. So perhaps if there are any references in here, we can say that those documents may only be used for council business. But I don't think I agree, council, that's up to the councils how they manage that. Some councils, they have a process for challenging a vote. I think Chugiak Council, 3 members have to challenge a vote. Some, it's 2/3 of the membership, and they're all over the board. And I think that's within the purview of the individual councils. So I think I seem to hear general agreement. You sign up, show up, you sign in, you're a member, you vote. But it's how you manage the membership list. So I think perhaps we need to look at this, but I don't think there's any requirement in here that they have to have a roster or a membership list. I think it only says that any membership list or roster can only be used for council business.
Thank you, Tim.
There's a bit of an honor system here in terms of, you take them at the word that they're a resident, and I know at our council, we introduce ourselves, everybody introduces themselves and says where they live or where their business is or whatever, but we're a small enough community council that everybody knows everybody anyway, so it's not, except the guests. But there is a bit of an honor system, and I think Daryl's right in terms of people don't necessarily have a roster. They do the sign-in sheet, and I think that's a good thing to do. There's an email list that have folks in there. But to assume that everybody is the member, I think it's appropriate to say you hope you're representing everybody. And I don't know how many of them have quorums required to vote on a measure. If you adhere to everybody, then it's a pretty good quorum.
Well, let's move on to nothing else. Kathy?
Yeah.
Sorry. Julia?
Can you just tell me how it is so that I know that you do it in Turnigan?
Well, before we vote on something, and assuming the people, we have.
Well, first start, besides the vote,
Yeah.
how do you determine who is a member?
Well, that's, our bylaws say anybody who lives, works, owns property, or why do I keep forgetting that last one?
Please.
Represents a business.
Nonprofit.
Anybody who works, owns property, or business, has a business within our boundaries, is considered a member. So I clarify that before we take a vote on anything. Anybody out there, and we do it 99.999% on the owner system. I have never asked for a property tax record.
Okay, so
anything,
then
or
if
an
all those
ID.
people are your members, are all those people, So that whole field is your member.
Yeah.
How do you determine your quorum that you brought up?
Well, I don't think that we have that in our bylaws, but honestly, I'd have to go back and look. That's never been an issue. So I mean,
Oh, I'm
this is-
sorry, I thought you said
So
that
this
was
is how
gonna be
I-
a problem.
This
if
is
there
how
was
I,
a quorum.
well, that's because it's not based on total membership. A quorum that we can't do business or vote on something isn't based on. It's just who's there. You know, if two people show up, we may vote on something. So this is how I define it. I say, anybody who works, et cetera, is a member of Turnigan Community Council and is eligible to vote on this motion. I mean, and that's how we've operated for, I think, at least 31 years.
So your
But-
concern is that if there is a quorum requirement,
Well, and that's a whole different, I don't know if my bylaws have.
I
a
thought that
quorum
you brought that
requirement.
up, I'm sorry. I thought
It
you
sounds
said
like
that-
other councils do, and I honestly would have to refresh my memory on.
Sounds like that.
what
Okay,
the
moving
term
on,
is.
we're- it's now
But I
2:40.
did have I did have one, just again.
Okay, which
Our
one?
our homeowners associations, included in that list of residents, property owners, business owners, and nonprofits. Are
Not the
they,
homeowner association itself,
I mean, should
unless it's a
they,
business
should they
that's
be
located there.
listed
Dick?
as well?
You know, community councils don't have business licenses, but a lot of homeowners associations do, or they're incorporated.
Okay, well, that's why I asked. I didn't know if they were covered by any of these other definitions.
I'm just saying.
I know we have people in Campbell Park, we have apartment managers, business owners that own an apartment complex that come and log our community council. And they help us a lot because they know who their tenants are.
Yeah,
We
but-
appreciate having them.
And so they're included in this list then? They'll fall into one of
They'll
these.
fall into one of those categories.
Well,
That
they
was
may
just-
fall into one of them, if they're not, if they don't have, they won't qualify just on being a homeowners association. The individual members of that homeowners association, the actual homeowners
Yeah.
will qualify because they live there. And then if there is an association that's doing business there that meets the business requirement, then it could have a membership also.
Okay.
But if it doesn't fit into the business requirement, then it won't have that.
And that doesn't come up in our council hardly at all. It just was something that occurred to me. I don't know if that's a big deal or not, to ensure they're included in that listing. I
Okay,
don't
anything
know.
else on page 3? I move to page 4. Anything on page 4?
This was,
Kathy?
John had a comment on.
Okay.
On this one, line 25 through 32. John Whittleton recommended that this section be moved to section, or this number 3 be moved to section B. And I think that makes sense. He said so the section would still apply to rules for setting up new community councils through A6. Moving to section B highlights this important issue as applying to all councils. Because it's a, section B deals with, more specifics about requirements of councils in the code.
Well,
But-
I don't know, I mean, B is what has to be in the bylaws. A is you don't even get bylaw review if you don't meet these fundamental criteria.
Oh,
So if
okay.
it's that important, then the rationale is to put it in the front section. Because you
Okay.
don't even get to the bylaws if you're not gonna be recognized as a community council.
All right. I
Anything else?
John made a good point, but I see what your point is.
Anything else on this page? Okay, moving on to page 5.
Oh, sorry. Number 4, line 32 on page 4, that it is in the opinion of the assembly representative of the residents of the district. How can that be verified that your membership is representative of all the residents of the district? I mean, honestly, how
In the
could that,
sign-in sheets.
how could that possibly? Well, no, but I mean, really, how could that possibly be determined?
Kathy, I've had the same question for 37 years.
Exactly,
But that's
yeah.
how long it's been in the ordinance.
Well, that's why,
I think
never
it's an
thought that.
expression of intent on the part of the original framers, was this is the intent.
Well,
this
and
is
there's,
one.
historically, this is also in there because you can have more than one voluntary association step forward and say that they are and wish to be the recognized one. And in that case, the assembly is gonna have to make the choice. If there are two organizations coming forward and saying that each of them is the one,
Assembly has to
then the
make
assembly has to be
decision.
making the decision to say, no, this one has been in place for 35 years and this one is not. And
I just
this
didn't know
one
if there was
says,
criteria on how you would verify that.
Al?
I don't see where that's ever been, a problem. So if it isn't a problem, then how do you?
Not in all the years I've been on the assembly and committee council, I've never seen it as a problem.
Yeah,
I wondered why it's in there and how it could
yeah, I just,
possibly be.
yeah, well, that's not a new section.
Okay, here we
No,
come.
I know. I
And so
just-
I'm
I know.
reluctant to take it out
I
because
know.
of the reason
I
I
wouldn't
just
take it
stated.
out. Dick?
It's gotta stay in Midtown Community Council.
Midtown Community Council, we
Was-
created it.
Oh, but it already was existing community councils. We, the assembly, had to determine that the people in there were better represented
I know.
by
And that
Midtown,
was
so you
our
have to
opinion,
leave
and we
that in
created
there.
it.
So you have to leave it in.
Yeah. It's when we created it, you were there, Dick.
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, many
it's
of
not a
them.
problem, so I.
You need to come back and visit us again, on the body.
And Kathy, to your question, I don't think in a situation like that, that it's gonna be something that is gonna be susceptible to thinking of those criteria ahead of time.
I think,
And
to
saying that
change
you're
that would
gonna-
create a bigger problem than you got now. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Sir?
There are some out there that I would argue are not representative of the community, and therefore, the assembly is saying, all right, bite your tongue. We're saying if you're a community council, we assume you're representative. There's some.
Okay, moving on to 5 of 14. Any comments on page 5? Kathy?
I think Ms. Tucker clarified this at the beginning, but as I was reading B, lines 7 through 13, so if, once these code changes are put into place, then I think this just needs to be very clear. So once the code changes are in place, this default becomes your new council bylaws immediately. And then the council has an opportunity to either say, we're good with this, or submit our own amendments to them, as long as they don't violate anything in here. And that's it's contrary to the code. So that's how this would work. Okay? So I was a little confused, and then you clarified it, but I'm not sure the language is that clear.
Judy, from your perspective, is the language clear, or do we need to make it clearer?
Why don't I talk to Daryl some more on that? And then I think that the place that we would add further clarification, absent something that comes out, is to highlight it in the assembly memorandum. And then spell out that this is how this operates. And then, because even so, I mean, what I would have anticipated is that these go into effect, and the final copy of this will incorporate by reference those things, some things that are already in your bylaws. Like your community council, where, it'll just say in the pro forma, it'll say, as in effect at the community, as in effect in the bylaws of or as stated in the bylaws of the community council in effect October 1st. Okay, so there'll be a bunch of things that we're not gonna, that are already out there that don't need to be changed to be compliant, but the things that do need to be at least uniform at the beginning will look like that. Then, in the 120-day period, I wouldn't imagine that you'd amend this, you just submit brand new bylaws, and then you do the incorporation, and we'll have a format. a pro forma for you, and Daryl has some other options that he's seen from different community councils, so you'll submit all new things, so we won't have to have a bridge sandwich here. You'll say, okay, here's my bylaws.
So then you come
And
back
then,
and just,
and then this is only there for the default.
so then you come back and, and you amend and restate, because even if your bylaws are in compliance now, there are some sections of the code you're gonna change that's in reference to what you currently have. So virtually all the bylaws are gonna have to be amended and restated to comply with the ordinance anyway.
Right, but this just gives a bridge
So
for
if you
that
take, the
120
default,
plus a potential
sure.
90. Well, community councils pull it together, and they have to go through a review process
Sure.
and come to the assembly and say, okay, in the meantime, this is in place to make sure that, as people pointed out here, that's why I had to think how to do this, because people at these meetings said, well, there were stories about community councils that there were assets sitting around, sheds, or, all different kinds of things, that when something went belly up, they owned property, and,
How
I
about
don't
many
wanna
bank
create a
accounts, they
big.
can't find anybody to take ownership of a
Yeah,
bank account?
yeah, so this is here to make sure that we don't.
Okay, Amy, and then Dick, and then down to you. Amy?
The only thing on page 5, item 4, where it talks about the 18-year-old's fiduciary responsibility, this is still one that, it appears my community does not, support the 18-year-olds. But we'll see, younger than that. But the, one item that was brought up that was a good point is our community, thus far, I think it's inappropriate for people under the age of 18 to be voting on liquor licenses or support of liquor licenses. So I just wanted to point that out to the group, because we haven't had that as part of the discussion before.
Dick?
Yeah, I thought I had this together, I just got confused. We're under defining community and recognition, we're under definition now. We're under recognition of community councils. And so, am I right to understand that when this goes into effect, all the new community councils have to be re-recognized, except that it already recognizes them, right here? If
On
they
which
are.
page?
If they, well, now wait. If this ordinance passes, there are a whole bunch of community councils recognized, de facto, 37 of them, which means what we're talking about on page 5 doesn't apply. So this whole thing about bridge sandwich affecting sitting community councils, current community councils, only comes into effect on section 2 on page 14, which I'm waiting to talk about, but not here. This is for new ones. Am I correct?
I don't think so. I think that you're correct that this is recognition of community councils. Then there's another requirement, that the bylaws have to be presented for acceptance. And so that's where we are.
Then I recommend then that you clarify in the one-time clause that always gets outdated. This is applying to everybody that's currently in existence. It applies to everybody listed on your 2040-040D at time of implementation. Now, having said that, you did just make a bridge sandwich, because what you're gonna do is you're gonna, let me ask the second question. Are there any community councils that are incorporated under the state of Alaska?
Yes.
You can't do this, because you do not have the power to override the bylaws as submitted and accepted by the state of Alaska.
Our legal counsel look into that.
This is for our purpose.
Bull dinkies. You can't have two sets of bylaws at the same time. State of Alaska trumps.
You look into that, Joanne, please.
I think it's a great comment.
You can do it here, Dick, but we'll never look into it.
I mean, there's ways around it. First of all, I'm offended. I think you ought to let us keep what we got, and if we don't get it together and you approve it in this time period, then we got what you told us, or we are no longer community councils. I'm okay with that. But it's a little totalitarian to say, this is it. I don't care what you've been doing for 20 years, and now you can go back to what you did 20 years ago when we approve it in 190 days or whatever. I find that offensive, but that's a policy call.
It just gives a
We go to him.
mechanism.
Yeah, forgive my ignorance here, but you were, and I assume everything we're talking about obviously is what's going on here, but we submit these to who, the assembly? And then that means the Assembly Rules Committee, and I would like to know how many assembly members are on the Assembly Rules Committee and how they get there. Are they voted on, or,
They're appointed by the chairman.
and how many is usually on the Rules Committee?
We just created the rules committee. There's 3 of us on there, myself, Evelyn Gray Jackson, and Jennifer Johnston.
So this is a maximum of 3?
Right now, yes.
It's a committee.
Yes,
It's not a
no.
committee.
It's a committee of
But
3.
it still has to be accepted by the whole
3.
assembly.
Yeah,
Well, no, it's-
yeah, it's just a pre-screen.
We submit these, so
all this has to be
then I'm
accepted.
wondering, later on it talks about the ombudsman, so who do we submit our changes to? The Assembly Rules Committee, the ombudsman?
The
Assembly.
The Assembly. And
And
then
they-
they will get it to the Rules Committee.
They
Yeah.
may ask me to review them.
And you submit
To
it
see if
through
they
the
are
clerk's office
compliant.
to the
City
assembly.
clerk, okay.
Yeah, and so
And
that's
then-
spelled out here, that you submit it to the city clerk.
Okay.
Yes, Mark, then
I
Kathy.
like Dick's idea that, that the existing ones would stay in force, you know, and giving them a time to adjust them and present them to the assembly at the start. I think that makes sense, because there will be utter chaos and people calling and screaming and so forth. The very small councils, the Bashers, the Bear Valleys, the Eklutnas, the Portage Valleys, they will hear about it, we'll talk to them about it, and then at the last minute, they will be going over this. Where some of the big councils, Northeast with 30,000 residents and, you know, those kind of things, they're gonna be better organized, and they're gonna work on it early. So I like the idea that Dick came up with of keeping your own, and through a certain period, whatever that period is, and then saying you have to submit them, and they have to be compliant by the end of that time, or complete that process.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, you just complicated things. I mean, I'm so confused now. I realized when I did read this, I wasn't sure, does this language only apply if a new council wanted to create itself? Because it almost kind of reads that way. Or is it applicable to existing as well as any new entity that may come forward? And I'm not, again, I think it needs to be reworded so it's really clear for people like me to understand.
Thank you.
And me.
Paul?
But I kind of see the point. You know, like any new change to any law, there's some existing bylaws and existing ordinance that people are operating under, and it's much like a phase-in process, or almost like sunsetting the other way. We should allow some sort of, and I think a reasonable period, including a year. That's what we're trying to do.
That was,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, that was the intent in the beginning. That's why we were stipulating 120 days and 90-day extension, all that kind of stuff, is so people had time. You know, I have no problem in recognizing your bylaws as your bylaws, and then you have this 120-day or the extension of the 90-day to get it back into what, yeah, I mean, to get it accepted. I don't have a problem with that at all. I think it's appropriate.
To get it in an acceptance with the ordinance, not so much this
Exactly.
bylaw example, right?
Exactly.
So-
And however it looks from your council's perspective, because, you know, just a moment of bragging, thank you for the information, Daryl, but the one community council that is in compliance is Chudiak. Just, you know, FYI.
So did we fall down and worship you, or what?
We're all so jealous.
Not a hurry, go get posted here, hold on.
I didn't write them, I didn't write them, but I was there when we accepted.
So I recommend, rather than 60 or 90 days, since most councils are off, most but not all councils are off for 90 days during the summertime, that be a 6 months or 9 months or a year, whatever, something like that. Then there's clearly a fall season and a spring season that it can be worked on, one of the two.
I don't agree.
Okay.
I-
Harold?
I think when Julie and I talked about this, and trust me, I didn't want to have to try to figure out how you could have default bylaws that fit all. I spent hours figuring out what to take out, what to put in, and what to reference. It was a lot of work, but I think we need to go back and look at 2005, the last time the code was amended. And when I look at the bylaws, and most of them aren't compliant with the 2005 ordinance. You know, and it's said in that ordinance, you have to submit new bylaws, amended bylaws that meet the requirements of the ordinance, and most councils did. And so I think that's why we wanted to put an incentive in there. Maybe it's a little harsh, but I think perhaps Julie and I could look at the 2005 process and how it worked back then. You were probably here, and we could do the default only if they missed the deadline.
You see, that's what I
Right.
think.
That was
I
my-
think that we do the default, exactly what
If
he
they
said,
miss the
if they
deadline.
miss the deadline.
Yeah.
And so that way we have a
Or you just don't
fallback
recognize.
and an
That's where we
incentive.
were.
Yes.
And then what we do about the ones that incorporated
I didn't want to go to that.
is that,
I'll
is
go
that
to you
they
next.
will, is that they won't be recognized.
Well, I
If we
think
can't
there's-
do it.
This was just to try and make everybody compliant.
Yes, ma'am.
Actually, that's what I was just going to bring up. What do you do about the one council or councils that are incorporated?
And in that case, if we can't fix it with this bridge, then they run the risk of not being recognized. And if they're not recognized, then they'll have to go back and figure out what to do about their corporation bylaws, because they will no longer have the
Be
status of a
recognized
community
community
council.
And
Yes, Darryl.
I was president for 5 years of the council that's incorporated, and we changed our bylaws twice. We approved them, and then we submitted them to the state. It's a simple process.
All you gotta do.
It's getting late. Moving on, page 5. We done with page 5? Kathy, don't drag us to 5 again.
I'm
What's
so
your issue?
sorry. This is one of my board members who brought this up. Line 20, 2B. He just thought that the wording self-determination and
Are
under
we still
charter
on
and
page
so forth.
5?
Page
Yes.
5.
He just, is that line, so he was questioning where that wording came from. Is that from the charter? Or is that something we just come up with?
Charter.
So that, I mean, that, I can tell him that if
Word
that's
for
the
word
case.
from
Charter.
Okay,
for word,
so
yeah.
that's what he's saying. And then number 4B, line 30, this is kind of a clerical thing. It refers to an executive committee. Later on some other page, it refers to board. I know with Turnigan Community Council, our bylaws refer to us as a board, not an executive committee. I don't know if one is better than the other. I think when there's reference to that entity, it should be consistent.
We were aiming for board, I believe, so that's an inconsistency.
Okay, so just change it to board.
Some community councils do.
Yeah.
Some community councils do not have an executive board, they just have officers. Others have an actual, you get elected, and those people are elected, like North Star, by the populace, by the members. Others, however, elect people to a board, and then the board chooses amongst themselves the officers for their board. So there's two different systems. Most just have the officers.
Our discussion about this was predicated on complaints from community councils regarding projects that happen during the summer. And currently the code, and the code has for decades, said they may create an executive board or like body. And we thought to address some of those concerns that we could mandate an executive board for every council to receive notice and act on behalf of the council between meetings. We were looking at the summer months when, gee, it's construction season and a lot of councils don't meet, and
Or the liquor
councils-
license come through during that time.
yeah, they need somebody to go to, but the qualifications for officers, their election, their terms, removal, replacement, everything is left up to the council.
Yeah, this was just a semantics thing. I wasn't questioning the existence of a board,
No, I just wanted to get the
just
fact.
that, reference executive committee versus board.
We've now got 59 minutes
I
left.
got it.
Al, on page 5?
I know just one comment is that, there's, a lot of council don't meet during the summertime. And the reason they don't is because a lot of them meet in schools and the schools are closed.
Yeah.
And so what our council is going to do, because we are probably one of the busiest out there, particularly in the summertime, we're gonna try and relocate from a school building to another entity so that council members can meet more in the summertime and maybe less in the wintertime. But that's our busiest time of the year, starting in April through the month of October. We got construction projects, we got all kind of things going on. every single year, so to us, that's the important time of the year.
I don't mind Campbell Park, we usually don't meet in the summer, this year we did. We went to a church instead, and it was so advantageous to us, because we had a lot of projects coming on, and if we hadn't been meeting in the summer, we wouldn't have known things like the bingo parlor that's coming in our neighborhood.
That's right. So I think, yeah.
And we had 90 people show up at that meeting. By the way, if you go to Tudor Bingo, it's moving. It's going behind the old Tony Roma's restaurant. They're building a new 21,000 square foot bingo parlor in there. And believe me, my neighbors are hot.
What, in addition to the building that's here now?
Yes, behind it.
That's a parking.
No, it's not platted. It is platted for a building, 21,000 square foot. They don't need any permits, they're going in there. That's where Tudor Bingo is now moving to.
I've heard from some of your constituents.
Yes, I know you have.
Poor girl.
Okay, moving to page 6.
Let's go on.
Yes,
We gotta get out of here.
Grammatical change, line
On
1,
page 6?
grammatical
Okay.
change, line 1, please reorder minutes or electronic recording.
Good catch.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on page 6 from anybody other than Kathy? I'll get to you in a second. Yes, Mark?
11K, again, it says maintenance of a attendance roster and active membership list. So is that mandated that there be an active membership list
I think we had the discussion.
or roster?
I think based on the discussion, we would probably change that to membership lists and meeting attendance rosters shall be used only for council business. And because I know some councils, most councils, when I looked at the bylaws, have a prior meeting attendance requirements in the previous 12 months before elections, and most of them use the sign-in sheets or the attendance rosters, whatever you want to call them, for
So you're
to
taking
verify.
off, suggesting taking off that first sentence? Is that
Right.
your line?
Right. I
Just
think
using
you
the
heard
second.
that a lot of councils don't maintain one.
Most.
Thanks, Mark. Anything else on page 6 before I go to Kathy? Yes, sir.
I'm here on behalf.
I'm not ignoring you, Kathy.
No,
I
it's
just want to let
okay.
the equal opportunity prevail.
I understand.
Michael Pankin on behalf of Lauren Bretz for Northeast. He had asked me to show up because he had questions about this, the idea of being able to vote for officers. We needed to show up to 2 meetings prior to the election to qualify to vote for it. This was something that they had addressed in their own community council, and when this particular issue was brought up, they had 6 yeas and 34 nays to this matter. They wanted to maintain the idea that they would be able to show up on the day of election and be able to vote for their officers without prior attendance. Part of that has to do with people's interest and the level of interest and involvement in their community councils. We have the same, this issue has not yet been addressed in Foothills, which is the community council I come from. There's a lot of the same attitude. They would like to show up and vote, and then if they don't want to come back for 2 years, they don't have to, or they would like to show up on the date of their action, or the date the thing has come up.
Amy and then Daryl.
I was just gonna say, in section 12A, it says bylaws may require, it doesn't mandate require, it doesn't mandate, it doesn't say shall.
Okay.
So that would, like a Chuyek's case, I mean, I can't remember council officers, but you could just sign in.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, this section, if I'm reading it correctly, doesn't say shall, it says may. So that is key in allowing your council to let somebody just show up, sign in, and vote.
Right.
But some councils have chosen to put that requirement of 2, so this still will allow that flexibility.
But that's not going to be in the mandatory rules that are coming up.
Right.
Just me.
No, and
Okay.
Mr. Bretz and I
Daryl?
had multiple conversations around this issue, and I have clarified to him multiple times that it is up to the councils. As almost everything to do with election of officers, it is up to the individual councils. And if his council Northeast doesn't want to have that requirement, they're welcome to have it. If your membership, you said they're discussing it, so if a majority of members say, we want a bylaws committee and we want to look at this and we want to change the bylaws, I think, once again, it's allowed now, but it's not spelled out in the code, and we just put it in here when Julie and I discussed it, just to clarify that councils, because we're changing and saying that you can show up if you qualify to be a member, you sign the roster, you vote.
Well, I think.
So we want to clarify that you may require previous meeting attendance for election of officers, just as everything else to say, to reverse that and put in the ordinance and the code that councils cannot have that requirement would once again be a fundamental shift in the relationship between the assembly and local government and the council.
Part of what I got from him was the idea that they were going to establish the Exhibit A over the bylaws.
Right,
Those
so I'm
bylaws were
making a
approved,
notice
and we
on
addressed that. We're
Exhibit
talking
A
about
to
how
make
we're
sure
gonna
that we're not-
keep the bylaws, and then if they get their bylaws in on time, that was kind of what, I think that was correct. I think his perception was corrected by that discussion.
Well,
She's working on it.
but I thought we might discuss those bylaws later on, but if you look, when it comes down to officers and election officers and things, it says whatever it was in effect with your council's bylaws. This ordinance doesn't have mandates the process for electing officers or their qualifications. So even if you miss the deadline to submit your bylaws, those sections in your current bylaws regarding those, because that's not changing in code, would be in effect.
Thank you.
Okay, page 6.
Okay, page 6, line 3. It references that all meetings should be minutes or electronic recording and will be made available, but it just kind of leaves it hanging. How should it be, how should our documentation of our meetings, how should that be made available, and to whom?
Any idea, Julia? Carol? Julia?
I thought that it should be made available at cost, and Daryl said, no, we were too, because I was worried about people wanting an electronic thing. He said, well, people can come in there and listen to it. So, you know, I'm open to any suggestion. We just sort of, I mean, they need, at least the people who attended need to be able to have access to what was there, and people who didn't attend should have access. I mean,
I agree, it's just that to kind of just leave it hanging like that and not stipulate how it should be made available, then it could be open to all kinds of interpretation or very loose interpretation.
When I looked at what's been in place for years, it just said notes, I think it said notes rather than minutes shall be taken at all meetings. And I thought, well, we should put in there and be available at the next meeting. But then I thought, these are citizen volunteers. The council elects the officers. The council should have the requirements that they be available at the next meeting, or they be available within 5 days. And I just thought it might be difficult for government to say that a volunteer officer elected by the council shall have their minutes done within X number of days or hours. Isn't it up to the council, the membership, to hold them accountable and set those standards? I think that was our quandary when Julie and I.
I could put in, I mean, because it says within a reasonable time determined by the community council will be made available upon request.
Right.
I mean, then you're done, so at least the sentence finishes.
So
But the-
upon request, I like that, that's good.
Yeah.
I just felt like
And
it
we
was
just wanted to
like
make sure
hanging.
that you had a reasonable time to produce it.
I
I
think
think
all of
that's
us in the community council presidents have been in the past, the hardest position to fill is our secretary.
Oh, you don't have to
I
tell me
mean, you can
that.
fill anything else other than secretary.
Well,
Nobody
and
wants to do it.
president, but yeah. Now, I have a question though, and I'm glad you just brought that up, Daryl, because I know I asked you this a few months ago, but when it says all meetings, does that include committee meetings or just the regular monthly type meetings of the full body?
Let's put community council meetings in.
I think the regular community council meeting, because
All membership
very
meetings.
minutia.
Well, membership meetings makes it sound like you're having a membership committee. I mean, it's just, oh, I see what you mean. Because community council meetings is, yeah, okay.
Al?
I think one question, going back to 6F on page 6, instead of having that upon request, put upon written request.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Upon.
That way you're not
Written
gonna have,
request, yeah.
you know,
The good news is we only have to do this
Upon
once every 10
advance
years,
written
guys.
request.
And I won't be here the next time this is done.
Are you sure?
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not famous last words.
So I apologize, Chair, so did we come up with a resolution to clarify between our full body meetings versus committee meetings and whether?
I think it's
And
full
what
body
about
meeting.
your executive board?
Right, board meetings.
We, I doubt that there's very many community councils that keep records of those meetings.
I know.
I would, seriously, Julia, I'd leave it a full meeting.
Yeah.
I wouldn't take it down.
Yeah.
I think it should be left
These are
up to
volunteer
the
organizations.
councils, because our council takes meetings, minutes to all meetings, but I think that should be, we shouldn't get too far down in the weeds. We should just, community council meeting, and I'll leave it up to each council if they wanna take executive committee meeting minutes and all that.
Darrell?
But I have a concern too, when you say membership meetings, some councils have an annual membership meeting. And then some call their monthly membership meeting or general membership meeting, so I think we need to think about that one.
Could the two of you get together and work this out? You know where we want to go on this thing. Yes, sir, anything? Okay, go ahead. Okay, on page 6, what else, Kathy?
Page 6,
Almost half of it.
section 12A, starting with line 24, these are purely grammatical type stuff. I'll just read how I think it should
Okay.
be reworded. Voting on council matters shall be open to all members in attendance, except that for election of officers and members of the board and amending bylaws which require prior attendance. So, I mean, sorry, I'm kind of messing that up, but it just doesn't quite grammatically capture that you have to have previously attended for elections and for bylaw amendments. And the wording just wasn't quite there.
But isn't that where the may require comes into factor?
Well-
That way the community council can determine, wasn't that the conversation we
May
just had?
require.
Bylaws may. Well, I guess,
Doesn't say
it's just
shall,
not,
it just says
it's
may.
not really flowing for me as far as the verbiage. So the
See what we
intent
can
is
do.
for elections to be shall, but bylaw amendments to be may? Is that,
We'll see what we can do.
okay, that's fine.
Anything else on page 6? Kathy?
Line 37.
I'm saving this so many hours, by the way, by doing it here.
I apologize because.
No, that's the reason I want you here, Kathy.
Okay, line 37, 13, I know we talked about this, you guys deleted that whole chunk about,
Yeah.
more requirements so people that volunteer at a council level don't feel intimidated by the conflict. But, because it's not addressed at all in terms of what if the council president decides to run for assembly? I mean, I think providing some kind of guidance being the key word, not any shall or anything like that, would be helpful, maybe not in ordinance, but in some other way, so that when councils may be faced with this issue that may come up, they know, they've got some kind of, what do we do about that? And maybe the default bylaws could have some recommended language or
Not the
I don't
default,
know.
but the model bylaws.
Or
put
model.
something in there. And the
Model
Federation
bylaw.
has language, but I agree with you, it'd be difficult to put in code because community councils seem to me like an incubator for community leaders and elected officials, and that was the
Yeah.
point I think Mr. Tremaine made, that we don't want to nip that in the bud and discourage it. So it's, once again, I think it's up to the membership. Everything pertaining to their officers really is up to the membership, so, and the individual councils. But they could put that in their bylaws. It's not in ordinance, so they
Yeah.
can put it in.
And that's why I was thinking, I think it might not be appropriate to put in ordinance, but if we could, councils could be provided with some kind of language to consider if they so choose, to give them a little bit of guidance, that would maybe be
See
helpful.
if we can. Amy?
I don't wanna see, I didn't like what was there before, I like how it is now, I don't wanna see any sort of overreach from the assembly. I would rather it be silent, to be honest with you. And, it comes back to, if a council wants to put some sort of stipulation in there, that's up to the individual council, but I just.
The biggest conflict would come up if you had assembly members who wanted to be officers of the community council after they were elected. And that's where we started about before, so, and same thing with executive members, and we had it that they could, they could have it reviewed by the ethics board, but we don't have to put it here. Because they get to have that reviewed by the ethics board under the ethics code once they accept their executive position or get elected and sworn in. And so because of the incubator factor, there isn't really a conflict that we can identify between somebody on a community council running for elected office, any more than there is somebody who is a member of P and Z running for elected office. That's even closer, and it's not a problem, because of that incubator
That's
factor.
fine.
Al?
Yeah, I think you can address that, in your bylaws, because I know ours has it, that if you file a notice of intent to run for any elected office, then you have to resign your position. And if you're serving in an office, then you cannot hold any of the positions. So I think, your bylaws can take care of a lot of those, concerns.
Right, and I think that's what Amy's saying, because
Right.
otherwise it comes from the assembly, but from the,
Right.
but it's fair for an organization to say, we want our officers to be committed. It's a lot of time and commitment to do it, to spend time here. We have a lot of demands on our secretary to do blah, 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 and we think that you can't be running a campaign and give our community council the attention that we need when we elect you. And it's fair for the body to say that. It's not so good for the assembly to be telling the council to say that.
Yes,
And we're part of our mission here, is to emancipate and support community councils, not,
No, that's
do that. So, that was our sensitivity that
Let's
Amy's
move on
talking
and get
about.
today done. Okay, page 7,
We're halfway through almost.
we're halfway through.
I just
Yeah,
have a
I
typo
will.
that's,
We have less than
grammatical.
half.
You have what?
Line
Kathy?
35, the word review after the period should be capitalized, that's all I have.
All right, next page done.
7.
Anything else on page 7? Okay, let's go to page 8. Anything on page 8? Page 9. Anything on page 9?
Well, John had something.
Yes, I was just going to say, Mr. Train, Mr. Weddleton had some suggested references to code, and Julie and I talked about that on the way back from our earlier meeting, and we will work to incorporate those code references. He made a good point there.
Okay, that's fine. We're still in the stage on this thing where we can make changes to it before we submit it to assembly. Right now, just for information, I'm gonna put this on the agenda on October 22nd. That's not, we're gonna hold a public hearing on it. That's just to get into the hopper. Because we got budget cycles coming up. We've got 101 things to get us busy.
Right, and that means it'll go in about the 12th of October to
Right.
make that agenda.
And that doesn't mean we can't make changes to it. I just wanna let you know, I'm trying to get in the hopper so we can get set for a public hearing in front of the assembly later on in November.
What does that mean in the hopper?
I mean,
That'll
it's in
be
the queue,
introduced?
basically, then.
It's introduced.
You're
We're
gonna,
trying to
we're gonna introduce
Yeah.
it.
And then,
Thank you.
and then there's an
We'll let you know we're
internal
doing that.
rule
It's on the menu.
that the things go in to the clerk's office about 10 days before the actual meeting. So that's why I give you the 12th. So we filed around the 12th for introduction on the 22nd.
Okay? Yes, sir.
The comment about the gentleman who put in information that would go good on this particular section, was that one of the printouts that was?
Yes,
Yeah.
that was this
Okay.
one that says Daryl
That
et
one.
al.
All right, that's
And
one.
then it had 2 attachments to
Yeah,
it.
and I got those too. Thank you.
And I think what that was about are actually making it more explicit, where this says in regard to the comprehensive plan. And so I think the interest there was to, focus that, we have a new one coming into effect, so, we'll,
I haven't read those yet, but I'll.
yeah. And then Al pointed out
Yeah.
that we have to be careful when we do that, because there are some that have their own chapter, and some that do this or that, so.
Okay, page 10.
Oh, my goodness.
Line 15.
I'm not used to this speed.
Line 15, Julia, line 15, the assembly should be capitalized.
No, it's not, actually.
See, we just had this discussion, sidebar discussion.
I didn't have a discussion with you.
Oh, you lied. You're such a good politician.
Yeah, but what should be happening is, sometimes it's capitalized, so anyway,
It's simple as the title. right?
yeah, well,
So why
yeah.
is it not? Can you edit, can you,
Here's what happens. In this paragraph, I tend to capitalize it, as you see in the first sentence, because the assembly is my client, and anytime I get a chance to, I capitalize it, but the reality is, and so here the second thing, I didn't do it. The reality is that no matter how many times I capitalize it, when a code revisor goes through, the word mayor, the word assembly, the word assembly member will all be in small cap. So what I will do is make sure that particularly within the same paragraph, I am consistent.
That's
in
all I care
how
about. That's all I care about.
How I did that. But, you know, assembly meeting will be put in small letters. I mean, it's just one of those things. But
Okay,
I can
perfect.
certainly start that. So that.
Anything on page 10? Kathy?
Okay, well, and this refers to John's number 4, with regard to, let's see, what he wanted some language. No, sorry, that's not mine.
Number
Go
four.
ahead.
We just-
5082,
Just talked about it.
which is on item 36.
Okay. Anyway, another way to handle the whole thing about filing, his question is, should code be telling the municipal clerk what to do? I think was his comment. And a way to get around that is, you know, we're under the section responsibilities of councils, you know, our functions. And we could require councils to not only submit our CIP list to the administration, but also to the municipal clerk. And that would get around telling the clerk what to do. I mean, because,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
I'm not sure, you know, I grab it. It's late in the afternoon, I haven't had my nap.
Yeah, I have no problem with the way it's set now.
Kathy, clerk is our staff.
Right, but John's argument was city code should, under what the council's responsibilities are, it shouldn't include a sentence about what the municipal clerk should do. That should go in somewhere else under municipal clerk duties. So it was awkward and didn't really fit in. But of course, the intent that we discussed was, we want this to go to the clerks too, so assembly people receive it. So why not just require the councils to submit it not only to the administration, but to the clerk's office, so that all assembly people get it as well? That's not asking a lot.
Right, but where
We
is
look at
it
that.
that they have to do it?
Page
On
10.
page 10E.
Page
Lines
10.
13 to 15.
Yeah.
It says the municipal clerk shall include the community council. and
Right, I know
party
that
members.
part, but where is it that the problem with that theory is that the place where it says that you're supposed to file it
Is the administration.
with the administration isn't in this code. And so we made up a new one that said, okay, when you're doing it under wherever code that is, you're gonna file it here with the assembly, and the assembly's designated party to receive that is the municipal clerk. So I'll look at this, but, and I understand your fix, but the problem is, this isn't the requirement that you have to file it with the administration. That's someplace else. I don't know where that is. And
I don't
so,
think it's in code.
and so, we're just putting a code that whenever you do that, copy here, so.
Or at least maybe
Here's-
just
here's-
delete that second sentence.
Here,
Because
Kathy,
it-
here's the reason I put this in
No, we
here.
put that in there
No, we
because we
wanted-
wanted it in
we put it
AIM
in.
and go to the assembly.
I understand. John's making the argument, though, that you're telling the community councils who they should admit their CIP list to. I got it, that works, that's no problem. But then the next sentence says, the municipal clerk shall do this. In the section that's telling the councils what to do. It
Right,
just
but
doesn't fit.
That's a misplaced problem, I believe,
Okay,
because
so I would say
the
delete that
drafting, the drafting would, if it had said, and will be submitted, will finally a copy with the municipal clerk, because apparently that's all right. We get to say where you get to file it,
Yeah,
right?
I have no problem
Okay,
with
with
that.
the municipal clerk, and it shall be included on an AIM, okay, if we had done it that way, right? Okay, but there's a rule of drafting that says stop using the passive voice. Don't say it shall, say who shall, so everybody knows who you're gonna do it. And that drafting is gonna override these grammatical and oddball things, because it's a drafting rule that says avoid the passive voice. When you have a person responsible, say that is.
Yeah. Oh, okay, I'm not sure.
I think
Anyway, I
that's
made
okay.
John's point.
Right, you carried his water. We'll look at
They
it.
didn't even ask me to do that, I just did it.
Well, I'm
but-
glad that you explained it, because I wouldn't have understood it.
Yeah.
Moving on. Page 10, anything else?
Page 10. Well, I'm wondering if there should be an F, because again, I'm referring to John's comment about accommodating community meetings as referenced in Title 21, one of his attachments. And that it actually makes reference that in addition to these other criteria that the councils really are responsible for, that we have these community meetings as required now by the section of Title 21. That, you know, if a developer or an applicant is supposed to, you know, approach a community council, and the council's supposed to have a community meeting to allow for that proposal to be discussed. And so that is a requirement of the council now. The only problem I have with is back in January, the Turnagain Community Council did want another part of a sentence included, but the assembly didn't see the wisdom of including it. Let's see, online, I don't have the stuff. Yeah, let's see, in Title 21, John's attachment, on line, let me think. On line 41.
Is it page 4 or page 19?
Of page
Little
19,
Okay.
line 41. The sentence that starts, if the community council's meeting for the project area is not scheduled in a timely manner. And I wanted inserted, or cannot adequately accommodate enough time for a thorough public review and discussion of the project at a regularly scheduled meeting, then the applicant shall organize a community meeting, because our agendas are booked. And so, right now, as what the code requires of council, if I have an applicant come to me, and I want to be on your October agenda, I've
Right.
applied for a rezone, you gotta fit me in per Title 21, and I've already got my agenda set. And I went till 10 o'clock in September. Our agendas are packed, and so there's no flexibility for a council to say, I can't fit you in. I just cannot fit you in. I'm so sorry. Yeah, we would meet when you want us to meet, but I can't fit you in. We have no flexibility with that requirement. But John's point is, because it's a requirement, it should be in the list of things that are being asked of the council.
So you're asking for an amendment to Title 21?
I am.
Okay,
I
so
thought I'd
that's-
sneak that in.
That doesn't
So
really.
that is pretty good.
And I glanced at this earlier today, and I think what it's saying is for when a project is being developed, their first choice for community outreach shall be the community council. And if I read John's suggestion correctly, he wants the assembly to put in code that community councils must meet to accommodate the responsibilities of this chapter of the code. But the really the onus is on the developer to go to the community council as the first choice for that community meeting. And if they can't be accommodated, then they are to facilitate their own community meeting. So I think it would be very difficult to put into code that this council, a council, Turnagain, if this developer has a project in the middle of July or December and they need a public meeting, that the council must hold a meeting. I think that's overreach.
Absolutely.
It's on the applicant.
Well, but the wording of Title 21 says, if.
We're not on Title 20.
No, but I mean, but it says, if the community council meeting for the project is not scheduled in a timely manner, the applicant shall organize a meeting. In other words, that's the only time an applicant can steer away from the council is if we don't meet in a timely manner. We may be meeting in a timely
Okay,
manner,
that's
we
not,
just can't
just don't
accommodate.
interpret it that way anymore.
Anything else?
Just don't, you tell the
We've got to
developer
move,
something
Kathy, we're
different.
running out of time.
Okay, I'll
But
just
what I
just double it
understand, what I'm
over.
taking away is that, and I think that this is good, is that we should consider an F section, not making it any extra burden on the community council, but to reference this function that is now in Title 21, separate from reviewing the comp plan.
Okay.
Anything else, Kathy, on this page?
Yes, I'm sorry. Something that's missing under municipal responsibilities to community councils in this big paragraph
In what
is
section?
notice. It says, it refers to wherever it's required that the appropriate residents or property owners and the community council be noticed of any application for certain things. But what's missing in here is when a decision is made, or when an action or review is made, we never get notification of that. And we're supposed to, at least I know on cell towers, because after Verizon has gone through 2 processes where the notification to property owners went to 500 feet and the Turnagain Community Council, but then once the decision was made by the administration to give an okay for their site plan and their application, we never got any notice that that took place. And yet, also in the cell tower code, you have 15 days, a property owner, not a council, but a property owner has 15 days to appeal that. But if you don't receive notice of when that decision was made, how can you possibly know you've got what your timeline is to file an appeal? So not only should the municipality be responsible for making sure that code is followed with regard to notices of the application, but also notices of the decision, so that the appeal process is very clear in terms of the timeline.
So where do you see that here?
Well, if that's the problem, it's not there.
But where's the notice
It's
of?
on page 10 or what?
Oh, page 10, this whole long paragraph under municipality responsibilities. On line, let me see if I can find.
19, 20 through 38.
Yeah, let's see, but on line, it starts on line 31, where municipal ordinance or resolution requires the giving of mailed notice to adjacent and nearby, and then they also have to notice the council, and that's why it's in here, et cetera, et cetera. But what isn't in there, but it is required.
Okay, so you would want this to be, and to repeat that it is, so is it a planning department notice?
Well, and I'd have to look through all the code to see where all that's required, but when
Well, this says it's a municipal requires the giving mail notice, it says right here, the planning department, so
Yeah.
small p, small d.
But I do, and I don't know if that's for everything, but I know specifically in the cell tower ordinance, it actually requires the applicant to send out the notice when a decision is made, and we never got notices from Verizon that a decision was made on either one of those. They actually violated city code.
Amy wants to call.
I just want to clarify what you're asking. So you want to require the municipality to give notice that these actions are being proposed, but also what action has been taken.
Yeah, once a decision is made on these reviews.
See, and I think, from my perspective, I think we're getting too far in the weeds because these actions that come before planning and zoning or the assembly, they happen in public meetings, and if we're concerned about it, people should.
No, but city code doesn't require notices to be sent out on decisions.
Yeah, and I don't think it should.
No, when the full bodies make a decision. But I can tell you, I didn't bring it with me, but for cell towers, it's in code that notification of the decision is required to be sent out to those who receive notice of the application. But Verizon did not do that, because then you as a property owner that got notice can file an appeal, but it has to be done within 15 days of the decision.
So what you're saying then is where city code already mandates that
Yes.
notice has to be given of a decision. 'Cause
Yes.
I'm just afraid
Yes.
we're straying into
No, no.
territory, that's all you're saying.
Exactly.
Where
it's
city
all-
code already mandates notice is given of action taken should be incorporated in here.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
that helps me, because I thought we were trolloping into
No, no,
this
no.
territory.
Well, it is a little bit different though, because what the code mandates now, as she said, and so I don't know this, I'm just listening to her, and I believe her, is that the applicant, not the city, is required.
So it wouldn't be under municipal.
And so, but the problem here is that we do have some where they're required to give notice that it's going on, and so I think we're just gonna have to look at that. it seems like it's in the cell tower code.
Well, it may be in
Yeah,
others.
But I mean, in
but
some
I
of those
don't know.
other ones, then there's no penalty when the applicant doesn't
Exactly.
notify you, and there's no checking on that.
Well, and that's.
We go to
And
John.
I don't know that
John?
we can fix that here, but.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm certainly not an expert on Title 21 yet, I'm trying to get there, but I'd be more than happy to go back and check on this example that Kathy's
Would you look
referencing
at
about
also Title 21, because there's a separate chapter dealing with cell towers in the Riverwood-Chugach area.
Okay, yeah, I've made some notes, I'll
They got a
get
special
those
statement.
notes back to
It's
June.
better than ours. Yes, Darrell?
John, go back and talk to Erica, because she's gonna be bringing forward some proposed Title 21 amendments regarding mail-out notices for land use, and this was generated by some cell tower concerns in Turnigan. That going forward, all mail-out notices that are currently required to go to property owners will also go to residents. So there are gonna be some tweaks, so this might be a time to address that.
I'll follow up on that.
Yeah, well, and we've got other recommendations that I've asked my two assembly people to work with the council on, and I've yet to hear back from them. On Title 21 changes on cell towers.
Okay,
Take
can
that
we,
also.
can we go?
Yes,
can we go-
but we have not gotten any, we have recommendations.
Kathy,
Take it off.
We haven't gotten back, haven't got anything back to us.
Anything else on page 10? We're gonna move to page 11. Anything on page 11? Okay. Record progress. Page 12. Anything on page 12? Kathy, I have fun teaching you, but I'd rather you talk to us here than in mass assembly meeting where we're trying
Well,
to.
this would be impossible, so I
This
appreciate
works.
this opportunity to.
I appreciate you
level.
being here.
I'm sure we all.
Page 13.
We're nearly done.
Page 14. Okay.
Oh,
Nick's gone. He
oh,
lost.
Hands up.
Hands up.
Whose hands up? Yes, Kathy.
Line 9, section 2. I think the wording is a bit
Which page?
confusing. Page 14.
Well, we're gonna have to fix this anyway, because we just said that we're not gonna do the default the way we
Right, there's some
thought.
changes have to be made,
Right?
Kathy.
Yeah, so that'll change.
Okay, so
Right,
if
so
you,
we're
if
not
you
gonna-
guys
yeah,
work
so-
on that,
yeah,
section
yeah,
2,
yeah,
then that's,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I
We're gonna
was
have to
confused.
completely redesign this so that the default happens only for those community councils that don't get
Okay.
their stuff in at a timely manner.
Right.
Thank you.
We
John,
already
on
won
the,
that one.
on the 37, actually, you're not the one I want, where'd Mark go? Dick, since you're here, on the 37 community councils we have,
Yep,
how many are not functioning?
12, maybe a third of them.
Seriously, never meet, never have met.
Well, never have them as a big statement.
Okay, in
but
the last
don't
2
meet.
years,
Oh, yeah.
last year, how many?
About 12.
Okay. Can you work me up a list, because part of this whole process is to figure out how we get more coverage. for
I have an answer to
communities.
that. It's called, the answer to that is called municipal funding of the Federation Community Council to get the word out.
Did you get your budget in yet?
The budget is in.
Thank you.
But it's a continuation budget from last year. It's the same budget as last year because the Federation Board is gonna consider a different budget at their October meeting. And we'll be glad to increase something to get the word out for you.
Yes, sir.
To that
You
end,
don't
I
actually-
would, to that end, I would like to hear from the Federation, each representative from the community councils, their request, because I've heard from my district, several community councils concerned about, particularly as we move away from mailing, and the cost of that, we know is fairly high. So I would like to find a way to figure out what that cost would be. I know that we have had cuts over the years, and it's, we know the community councils need to support the Federation and the budget, so I'd like to know that number.
We will have a robust discussion in October on that issue and come forward with recommendations to you.
Al?
Well, I think also under the municipal contract that we need to, as the board, to provide a long-range plan for the operation of the federation to support the councils. That's under the community contract that's been written. So I think that has to be part of the work that has to be done at the next meeting also. And so I think there's a lot of options out there when we talk about what can they do. There's a lot of things that they can do, but I guess the question is why can't they be executed if you had the funds or if you do have the funds now? So there's a lot of things goes into that equation. I'd like to point out that under the Federation bylaws, that a council can be excluded from being an active member or board delegate if it's sent to them in writing. If it's not sent to them in writing, which has not been, and you have to constitute all 37 councils as being counted for the calculation of a quorum.
You gotta know where to send it though, Al.
Well, I looked at the list, today, and it was probably about maybe 3 that didn't have an address, but on the other hand, have we contacted them?
Well, we may want to look at the, as you guys were talking about the recognition, is that, if you have a certain deadline and you don't get it in, then maybe you don't get recognized.
Who do you address?
You don't have to, because it's in code.
Well, I know,
So
but
you're gonna have a public hearing on it, and it's gonna be out there, so you're not gonna have this thing that says that, geez, we don't, it's a catch-22, we don't have an address, we can't notice them, and because we can't notice them, then we can't make them defunct. No, you have broad public notice that says that if you don't have a meeting, and don't constitute, and don't submit, who your officers are, and acknowledge in some way, then you're done, and it opens it up for a different group to come forward when it does. So you have a slot for them, but they're not recognized.
Then we'd also have to address boundaries.
Yes, Al?
I think that what would really help us a lot, the Federation has an email list for each council, how many people are on that list. They also should have a copy of the hard copy mail-out list. Those could be counted up by council and say, look, okay, this is the Avaluk Council, you got 318 on email, you got 469 on hard copy. That's a tool then for us to measure what's the participation and activity out there. And we haven't had those for years and years and years, but I think it's a good management tool, not only for the councils to know where they're going, how they're involved they are, but also to measure these councils need to work more to get more people actively involved. It gives you a tool to work with, a management tool. And I'd like to see that given to us at the next meeting by the Federation office.
Paul?
I think that's, I didn't see Mark, I know he had to leave, but that's something that I just want to thank Mr. Trenny, Mr. Zabowski, Steele, Julie, of course, Daryl, and everybody that's here. I mentioned my name, I know a lot of you. But in any event, I haven't made every meeting, but I've tried to make as many as I could with the ombudsman, with Mr. Trenny, and with some folks from the FCC. I'm pretty actively involved in my community council, I know that. It's very important. For many years, I was so busy at work and working schedules that I couldn't make those meetings, but I was a representative in my official capacity in several different others. So I've been around the city and watching community councils, and I'm sad to say that, I know this body has not done its part in trying to make sure that the Federation and the community councils are recognized as the important stakeholders in our community that they are. And speaking for myself, it's not necessarily on a deliberate act. It's just simply everybody makes assumption there's just a lot of things going on. I didn't know we had 12 councils that weren't regularly meeting out of the 37. That's a substantial number, and it's shocking to me, frankly. And so whatever it is that we can do to try to find maximum participation, I'm all about that. But I know we're not an endless pool of however we were playing an exercise today a little bit about budgeting, but I know we can do better, and I'm committed to doing that too. So whatever I can do.
Dick, I will tell you that I attended a Chamber of Commerce meeting where the mayor announced that his new budget for next year is going to be $4 million less than this year. And that's going to mean that as we come to budget cycle for the Federation, we've got to turn the troops out, belong to community councils, just to tell us how important the Federation is.
Well, I think
because every budget's going to be on the line.
Well, I think if you're going through an area of redoing the code for community councils, and part of that is the part that we haven't gotten to yet, and this is to our own detriment, Appendix A. where it says we'll be putting things out by mailing. If y'all put that one in there, y'all gotta fund that one.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I have one other thing. For those that are here that have submitted documents, is it possible for us to get these electronically? And the reason I say is because I can. Okay.
Daryl's been
So
collecting.
if you've got these electronically, Darryl, and the reason is I don't know if you've done it, but I could certainly make contact with the community councils in my district, and because they're interested in what we're talking about, some people just can't be here
Yeah,
represented.
we send all the documents, I didn't send the comments out, but the draft ordinance, the draft, which is only draft, I'm glad you caught the in writing. I was typing away on this at 7 o'clock this morning, and just finished about 15 minutes before our meeting. They were sent out to the group, I'll forward to you, and they're all, any of these are also sent to the Federation, along with the notices of the meeting and where to send comments.
So do you know if they're on their website or someplace where we can, I can
Well, I can send them to you, but
And the draft ordinance is on the assembly.
it's on the assembly. I don't think they have the latest version, they have the previous version.
Yeah, we have.
Close enough.
But
Yes, ma'am.
it's up to the Federation whether they post it or not.
Yes, ma'am.
When we finish the current discussion, I would like to go back to a point in the draft that Kathy actually made.
It's fine, what page?
It is on page 4. It's line 34, item 4. No, it's, I wouldn't consider myself any particularly paranoid person. But I agree with Kathy that there is no criteria here for the assembly on which to pass an opinion. So can you tell me something that will make me more comfortable about that statement?
That has worked for 40 years.
Depends how much paranoia we're dealing with. We're all former community council presidents, at least 4 of us here. We care about community council, we want to make sure they represent the people in their district. And to the degree there's 11 of us on the assembly, you're right, but it's our job to, we formulate the opinion of the assembly on every issue that comes in front of us. And if people don't like our opinion, then they turn us out in the next election. I don't have the concrete thing I can tell you, but we wouldn't be here if we didn't care about community council. There's other things we can do with our time.
Well, that's not a new proposal.
No, I understand that. You say it's worked for 40 years. Has it actually been applied?
Well,
Has it had to be applied?
to be
first of all?
honest, I don't
And-
think my community council is representative of the neighborhood I live in. I don't think, honestly, I don't think most community councils are truly representative. I live in a neighborhood that's 80% renter, less than 50% Caucasian, and the community council is 95% white property owners. So, you're right, it is subjective, but I think it's worked. That's why I think it's, what is here is important is the intent. And as Julia said, if you have 3 groups saying, I want to be recognized, or you have a new group in your community council area, 50 people get together and say, we want to be recognized as a community council, then the council, you're right, would have to make a decision who is more representative of the neighborhood, and how would you develop criteria for that?
Well, then, so that's pretty broad. That statement is extremely broad. It's been in there for 40 years. If it hasn't really been applied, is it even necessary to have it in here?
Well, Dick Tremaine gave you an example, and that was before my time, where it had to be applied.
Talking
And-
Midtown?
And, yeah.
And we created it because they didn't have any representation. Because when you look at those neighborhoods, mainly around community councils, we needed one for just down the Midtown Business District. And we created the Midtown Community Council.
And so what I would refer you to make you more comfortable in that invitation is the language that we've now copied directly from the charter and put in here in at least 2 places. And that is the part that says that affords citizens an opportunity for maximum community involvement and self-determination. And so that's what, on a challenge, on recognition, it would seem to me to be that the assembly would have to come forward and say that a group isn't doing that, or a group who wanted to be recognized, would base its case around that charter language of offering citizens an opportunity for community involvement and self-determination. And when it doesn't, then there's a problem.
Mr. Honan?
And that's why some of the provisions that are in here about voting and our interest in clarifying the definitions for business owner and stuff like that are in there so that you have them.
Mr. Honan?
And I think the same thing, I haven't had a chance to actually need, or there hasn't been an opportunity or need for that, use of that, but I can see and I can envision, having been at several county community councils, some quite large, and you're right, I mean, when there's an interest item on the agenda coming up, and the only requirement is, if you're gonna vote on this, to be there 2 previous meetings in the last 6 months or something like that. They come in, they sign in the agenda, they sit there for a few minutes, they leave, they come back the next month, do the same thing, and then when the third meeting or the time this comes up on the agenda for vote, they come in and stock it in euros. That's a way of accomplishing the mission without having to establish. In fact, some people could say, we don't want to wait till the elections to turn people out and get our people in, so to speak. But that's just a way of doing it, and I can see where if there's a need that it potentially could. And I think it needs to be a little broad, but at the same time, I'm very comfortable with the definitions coming in under the new code.
So it
would
has
this
to be
only
that the
applied-
assembly.
So
that
would
the-
this only be applied in case of a challenge? Is that what you were saying?
Pretty much, if you had like 2 groups coming in saying,
Right.
we want to be recognized as Northeast.
Why don't we say something to that effect, that it's in case there's a challenge, or am I missing that? That's implied.
Because the other factor is that the charter specifically says that it's the assembly, not the executive branch, not the mayor, not the community council residents themselves who recognize the community council. So you have to sort of have that in there someplace, that it is the assembly that recognizes the community councils. Otherwise, it's not it's not a automatic operation. You can't have a situation where a community council
Can't have a
can
self-declared.
operate as a community council without
I
recognition.
understand that. So now back to Mr. Hess's community council, where he just said it seems that the council is not representative of their community. So is that up to somebody in the community to
Well,
challenge?
my response to that, there's different levels here. I think on a certain level, most community councils, or certain ones, depending on what part of town, may not be truly representative of the composition of the neighborhood. But then the answer is, have you reached out to those people who aren't attending, made them feel welcome? And I went door to door and passed out 2,000 letters to different churches and organizations. And if they choose to come, a part of the burden is on the citizens to make that effort. That's why, to say that everybody is a member, but you can't get them to come to a meeting, I think there has to be a burden on citizens. You can make it an open meeting, you can make it easy for them to come and sign and join, but whether, in my opinion or somebody's opinion, a functioning council may not be reflective of the demographics of their neighborhood, that's to a great extent the fault of the people who choose not to come to the meetings. So it's a multifaceted issue.
Yes, Al, it is time. It's time.
I missed my nap today, guys.
Kathy?
Well, Daryl, I know it sounds like you worked very hard on these bylaws, which we didn't get to today. But I think it was really good to finally, get through this code language, maybe for close to final time. But then, Chair, I guess I'd like to know when we will have an opportunity to go through this, because I
I'm
haven't
gonna
even
talk
had
to
a
Daryl,
chance
we're
to
gonna see about
read
getting
it
another
yet,
meeting
but-
so we can go
Well,
through.
plus you could submit written comments.
Yeah, but I mean, this dialogue may
This
not be
works better.
helpful to anybody else, but I know it's helpful to me to bounce things back.
We'll
and
get a
forth,
hold of it. We'll get a hold
get
of it.
responses.
We'll get a hold of
So,
it.
I'll be
Okay,
out
I
of
just,
town October 19th.
You will be? Okay.
But we have to
Just
submit
quick.
it before then anyway.
Yes, Tim?
Yeah, just quickly,
As well.
at some point, I think that we need to address, if there are that many councils that are inactive, we need to address that inactivity and adjust boundaries so that the population
That's what I
as a
wanted Mark
whole
here for, but he left. I
is,
want to take a look at, do we need to collapse some community councils down, take off the recognition, and collapse the boundaries down so we can
We need
get
to
more
try and
functioning
have-
community councils?
Yeah, we need to.
Yes, Darryl. Yes, John?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just quickly, I did attend the September 18th meeting at the Federation. You were there as
Right.
well, and I think some others. And indicated that the Community Development Department had initiated the boundary review procedure, which is called for under the code. And so want to work closely with the Federation to get that feedback. I've gotten just a couple minor boundary issues so far, but it sounds like there may be some more significant ones out there. So, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to.
Would you get with the body, the Federation, talk to the president, talk to their executive official? I need to know exactly which community councils are not functioning, because that'll help you doing what you're gonna do.
Right.
Because we may have to look at consolidating some to give better service to the rest of the people. Because if they haven't met in a year, then they're not reflective of the people in their area. So it'd be easier for us to consolidate it down to get some more coverage until we can get people in there to get the community council functioning. I did the same thing with Rogers Park years ago, where they were not meeting. Now they are again, and they came back, and we have 20, 30 people show up at that community council every meeting. But for about a year and a half, they weren't functioning. Yes, Al?
I
We
think
gotta
the
get
other
out of
thing
here.
is to get from the Federation is a list of each council, how many people are on the email list, and how many are on the hard copy list.
Well, keep in mind that they don't have all of the email lists and hard address lists. Like, for example, the FCC has nothing from Sand Lake Community Council. We manage our own.
Well,
And not everybody on an email list are members. I mean, there's lots of people that
Exactly.
request to be on our email list that are consultants and elected officials.
or you might be able to get those from the individual councils who should want to cooperate.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Yeah. That way you'll say, okay, XYZ's got 3 people on the email list, 5 people on the hard copy list.
We have a lot of people, I think, on our email list.
Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you.
Anybody that signs in
Adjourned.
to our council.